Hello and welcome to another virtual author chat at the Poison Pen Bookstore. I'm John Charles, and today I'm delighted to have back with us local Phoenix author Liz Johnson, whose new book is The Last Way Home. Before we begin chatting, I do want to let those listening in know that the Poison Pen does have copies of Liz's, well, we have copies on order of Liz's new book. It's coming in August, but we also have her other titles, and if you'd like a copy, we'd be happy to put one aside for you to pick up or put one in the mail. Just give us a call at the Poison Pen or go online and we would be happy to connect you with Liz's books. And now I'd like to welcome Liz Johnson.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here again. I always like to know a little bit about an author, who they were before they started writing, because I think that can sometimes shape their writing career. So can you tell us a little bit about Liz pre-writer?
Wow. Well, I've basically always been writing, but I think I wrote my first story when I was 7, and I signed my first book contract at 27. And for those 20 years, I was constantly writing, just terrible books, just really bad, bad books that will never see the light of day, but they were good practice. And I learned how to write by writing. And so, but before I sold my first book, before I was, a professional writer, I was working in publishing. Actually, I always dreamed of working in publishing, and it was sort of I think it was inspired because of all the reading I did. I read all the time, and I specifically remember one summer when I was in junior high, I read like 25 books in the same series. It was a very long historical family saga, and I read like 25 of those books in one summer. And my mom was like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "I'm reading." And I think because of that, I always wanted to work in publishing. And so I got my first job in publishing when I was almost 25. And I worked in publishing for 10 years. And I worked for divisions of Random House and HarperCollins and some independent folks who were bought by HarperCollins. And anyway, so it was just a real it was an adventure for me, and I loved it. I moved all over the country to work in publishing, and it just was a real, like, it was inspiring to be around so many books. And I continue to feel that way. My house is filled with books, and I just am always inspired by that. So I think words have always been an inspiration to me, and I'm inspired to write them and to read them. And so for me, it's always been publishing.
Did you kind of work in the marketing side of publishing business?
Yes, yes. So I started off as a publicist, and I did that for about 4 years, and that was quite an adventure. And I like to say that that's kind of a young woman's game because now I'm like, I don't think I could keep up with that pace anymore. But it was a lot of fun to do that, and I got to work with some really amazing authors who, again, were just such an inspiration to me. So yeah, so I was in publicity for 4 years, and then I moved into marketing. And eventually, when I had already been published, and my supervisors realized, oh, she has some editorial chops. Then they kind of moved me into a marketing and editorial position, which is what I had when I ended up leaving publishing.
Now, while you were working in publishing, did that reinforce your viewpoint that you wanted to be an author, or did you see so many of the kind of the behind the scenes thing of the business that you thought, no, no?
You, you know, I think what it did was it showed me that authors are real people.
Huh.
I think maybe I had before I started working in publishing, authors are kind of elevated, and in my mind that, oh, I could never, maybe I shouldn't even aspire to that. And then meeting them and working with them, it was like, no, these are just ordinary people with a love for the written word who have worked on their craft and, trained really hard and want to share, an entertaining, inspiring story with the world. And I was like, hey, that's me. I could do that. And then it ended up that it was actually a coworker of mine who told me, like, I told her about a story idea I had, and she's like, you have to write that. And I said, no, I'll never finish it. And she's like, yes, you will. And I was like, oh no. And so every day she would ask me if I had written the night before. And I got tired of saying no. So I started writing. Like I set up a schedule just 3 days a week. I was writing every 3 nights a week. And um, in about 3 months, the book was done. And she said, so what are you going to do with it now? And I was like, I don't know. But that became my first novel, which I wrote for Love Inspired Suspense, which is a division of Harlequin.
Oh,
Yeah.
so that was your first book, and you got that published, and
Yes.
gone on to write a number of different novels after that, and novellas. Um,
Yes.
your new book is The Last Way Home, which is part of your Prince Edward Island Shores series.
Uh-huh.
Can you tell us a little bit about the new book?
Sure. So The Last Way Home is the story of Eli Ross, who is the oldest brother in the Ross brother trilogy, as I like to think of it in my mind. So Eli is a disgraced NHL hockey player who has nowhere to go except home. And when he left home 10 years ago, he hasn't talked to anybody in his family since then. And so now he's back and he's not sure, what the reception is going to be like. He's not sure if they're going to welcome him home or ignore him, or what's going to happen. But he's broke and he's got some sort of sins of his past are following him to the island. But when he shows up, he discovers that while some in his family aren't super happy to see him, the person who is least happy to see him is Violet Donaghy, who is his mother's business partner in a pottery shop. And Violet is sort of, the Ross family has become her found family. And the fact that Eli hurt his mom, hurt this woman that Violet loves so much, Violet can't forgive that. And she's not eager to forgive that. And so she's the one who really holds a grudge for the whole family, and is not interested in forgiving him. But when a fire starts in the pottery shop, and they lose all of their inventory for the summer, they have to figure out a way to sort of save the shop and rescue this business that has been, years in the making, that they've is just starting to sort of find its footing. So anyway, so they're rescuing the pottery shop. And of course, Violet and Eli are thrown together and having to work together. And they may just discover that they have some secrets that both of them aren't eager to share. But when they do, they discover they have a lot more in common than they thought.
Setting is very important in most of your books, if not all of them, and particularly in this new trilogy that you're writing. Can you talk a little bit about the Prince Edward Islands? Why that drew you as an author? How do you do the research, especially the last couple of years where travel was not always something we could access easily?
Yeah, so I I was heartbroken that I was not able to return to Prince Edward Island. I was going to go in the summer of 2020, and then everything shut down, and it was like, well, okay, so this is not happening. Um, and it was heartbreaking, and yet I'm so thankful that I had visited 4 times before that. And so I have lots of pictures and lots of wonderful memories of the island. And I cannot recommend a visit highly enough. Like, it is just the best place to go. And I think that what I discovered about Prince Edward Island, so initially I visited the island because of Anne of Green Gables. I think, probably a lot of folks, that's sort of their first introduction is Anne. And that was my first introduction. And I think that, like, I went to the island never planning to write anything set there, because how could I write something set there when they already have Anne? But I discovered that there's so much to love about contemporary Prince Edward Island, that I wanted to write about it. And mostly it's about the people there. I just find the people there are so gracious. They're so kind. They are welcoming and inviting and chatty, and they love their island. And that comes through. And I think what I discovered there, they call Prince Edward Island the gentle island. And so it's a very, like, kind of quiet, gentle pace to life. And coming from the city, coming from Phoenix, coming from, I had lived in Nashville before this. I was used to sort of a faster pace. And when I got there, it was just this sort of stillness and a moment to just sort of take a deep breath and quiet my heart and be still for a little while. And I didn't realize how much I needed that until I was there. And so that's, I think, what I want to communicate in my books is that PEI is just like, I like to think of like my books, all of my books set on Prince Edward Island are about broken hearts finding healing. And that is, I think, what I discovered there as well was like, oh, this is a place for healing. It's a place of where you can find solitude if you need it, but also there are people who just genuinely care and have compassion and love for each other. And so for me, that's been everything I write about Prince Edward Island sort of stems from that.
It was fascinating because you really captured the feel of that setting. In the first book in the series, there's also these little details that are unique to them, like it was lobster fishing and things like that. In the second book, The Last Way Home, there's the pottery industry, and you mention, now I don't know whether this is an author invention on your part or whether it's based on something real there, but red clay, there's this special red clay. Is that really a thing there?
It is. It is. So Prince Edward Island is known for sort of red, excuse me, red dirt, red earth. And so there's a whole industry of red related things on the island. Like anytime you see pictures of PEI, often you'll see the red cliffs
Oh,
and things like that. And so it just comes from a high concentration of iron in the soil. And so kind of anywhere you go, like if you're driving along a paved road and it suddenly turns to dirt, it's going to be a red dirt road.
hmm.
And it's just stunning. It's gorgeous. So potters on the island, like artisans, they take their clay from the island and it is red. And so it's really fun. I have several like coffee mugs and other pieces of pottery that I've purchased there on the island that that are, you know, they're fired and they're glazed and all of that, but then you can still see on the bottom that it comes from that red clay. So it just really still has that sort of red, earthy feel that is so unique to the island. Yeah.
That's fascinating. So those little kind of details that make things really pop in the story. I think there's a misperception on the part of some readers, if not many, that when it comes to writing a novel, writers just make everything up. There's no need for research. And I think a lot of novelists have to do some, if not a great deal of research for their books. In the case of your new book, The Last Way Home, the hero, the protagonist, is a hockey player. Did you always have a fascination with hockey? Was this something you had to research? Let's face it, you're living in Phoenix. It's not exactly like we're, ice central for the world.
Yes.
Talk about how you research your books, hockey maybe in particular.
Yeah. So, yes. So, so we do live in Phoenix, which makes, yeah, which means that there's not a lot of ice to be found, but I am delighted to say that there is some ice to be found in Phoenix, which I'm very thankful for. And I'll back up just a little bit and say that one of my trips to PEI, my mom and I were driving around. My mom's my travel buddy, so she and I were kind of tooling around the island, and we drove into this little town called Montague, Prince Edward Island, and there was this big banner across sort of the main entrance road. It almost looked like one of those like Founders Day parade or something kind of banners, but it was announcing the name of a local boy who had made it to the NHL. And I said, oh, wow. I said, the NHL is a big deal here. Like, it's a big deal anywhere. Like, let's face it, like, it's professional sports. That takes so much effort and time and talent. And yet for PEI, it's like a big deal. And so, and I was recently talking to somebody else from another part of Canada, and they were saying, oh, yeah, in all the small towns in Canada, this is the thing. This is, to make it to the NHL is every little boy's dream. And I thought that really inspired me to want to write an NHL story where it was like just the idea that somebody had made it and had sort of escaped PEI if they felt like the small town was too small for them, and made it to the big leagues. And so I saw that, and that really inspired me, and I loved that. And so I sort of had kept that in my pocket for a while, and then when this story came around, I was like, this is the right story for that. Um, so fast forward, I moved to Phoenix and after that visit to PEI, and I said, I have to find some ice. Where do I find ice? And so I just started Googling ice rinks, and thankfully Phoenix has a few. And there's one that's a little ways from my house, but it's over in Peoria, and it's called Arizona Ice Peoria. And there's an Arizona Ice Gilbert, I think. And there's a couple different ice rinks, but I found that that was like my favorite one because it was easy for me to get to on a Saturday, and I could just go to the public skate. And so I started going to public skate, and I had taken ice skating lessons when I was 25, and here I was almost 40 when I was getting back on it. And I was like, oh, it's been a little while, but I realized, oh man, I'm really loving this. This is so fun. So then I signed up for like the adult skating lessons, and my instructor was also a hockey, like a specialist hockey coach. And so I just was watching everything, and so I'd go to the public skates and I would watch the guys who were like, you could tell they were there to practice, or like even the little kids and their pads and and just weaving in between people. And so I spent like pretty much every Saturday for a year at the hockey rink, just watching, asking questions, on the ice, like even just like the smell of the ice and the experience, and what does it feel like when you lose all traction and you're on the ice. And I had a blast. I loved it, and it was so fun for me. And in fact, there's one experience that I had that made it into the book where I was skating along, and all of a sudden somebody grabbed my rear end. And I said, whoa, what just happened? And I look behind me, and it's a little boy who was about to lose his balance. And he just needed somebody to grab onto. And so I put that in the book because I thought, this is what happens when you're on the ice, is, you end up with people of varying skill levels. And I am not a great skater, but I love to be on the ice. So that's kind of my research for that. And then of course, like lots and lots of like hockey stuff, and like, oh, what kind of drills are they doing, and that kind of thing.
The Last Way Home, I think we could say, is also a story about the Prodigal Returns.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about why you wanted to incorporate that theme into the story?
Yeah, that's it's a really big, important part of this story, is sort of the prodigal son returning. And in my faith tradition, in the Bible, the story of the prodigal son involves several characters. And so you have the prodigal son who's returning, then you have his father who is welcoming him home. But then you also have this older brother character who is angry that his father is welcoming the son, the prodigal back, and like pouring out, like throwing a party and giving him a ring and a cloak, and and all these things. And so over the years, I've sort of wondered which one of those characters am I really most like. Like I try to put myself into that and say, like, am I the prodigal who's run away and is coming home? Am I the father figure who's eagerly forgiving others who have turned their back and are now wanting forgiveness? Or am I like the older brother who says, like, you don't deserve that forgiveness? And so I think about those in my own life. And so for this story, it was really fun because really every one of those characters is represented in The Last Way Home, but they're not always necessarily the ones that you expect. Like, the older brother isn't played by the older brother in the book. Instead, Violet really takes on that older brother, refusing to forgive, or not feeling like the other person is worthy to be forgiven, kind of thing. And so I just think that there's a lot of room to sort of think about, for myself personally, where do I fit in that story? And I've just always been fascinated by it. I just think it's a really beautiful story of forgiveness, and forgiveness is, I think, just something that all of us desperately need. And so, yeah, so I loved getting to sort of play that out in a little different way.
Yeah, I think you're right. We always try to see who we would be like. I guess a comparison would be the Mary and Martha story, and
Mhm.
everyone wants to be Mary, but most of us are Martha.
Right, right, exactly.
Let's talk a little bit about your writing process because many readers are fascinated by that. I know some authors have everything set in stone to a T before they begin, others just start typing. How do you approach your novels? And especially in the case you've written some other trilogies and your current book is part of a trilogy, do you have to know how things are going to play out in book 2 and 3 when you're writing one? You just cross your fingers and hope you can write yourself out of the corner. Talk about writing, a writing series, and your process.
Yeah, that's such a good question. And I chuckle because I definitely do write myself into a corner sometimes and then say, oh, I got to figure out how to get out of this. And I think, so I think that all of my story ideas, like usually when I start a series, I have a general idea of what each of the 3 books in the series are going to be. And I've not written a series longer than 3 books, so that's helpful. I think if we went too much further, I'm not sure I'd be able to, sort of have them all planned out. I don't have the details of every story when I start writing, but I do have a general feel of like, oh, this for this particular series. I knew that the first book was going to be about the middle brother, Oliver, and the second book would be about the oldest brother, Eli, and then the third book will be about Levi, the youngest brother. Which, by the way, if you're a writer out there, I don't recommend making your heroes' names so similar. Oliver, Levi, and Eli. And let me tell you, I have messed those up so many times. And I go back through and I'm like, no, I don't think that's Eli in this scene. Like, I think this is somebody else. And so anyway, so I sort of had a plan of like, okay, it's going to be the 3 brothers, but some of the details of that actually came out like as I was writing. Like, for example, Levi is the youngest brother and he's very shy and kind of quiet, but I didn't really know that much about him until he started showing up in the first book in the series, Beyond the Tides. And then all of a sudden he was very bookish and he was always reading. And I was like, oh, I love this about him. This is great. And so, so some of those things sort of come out as I'm writing, but I always say I have a bonus, like a benefit because I write romance. So I always know, I know where we're going. Like, I love to write a happily ever after, and that's what I want for my characters. That's what I want in real life. And so I think that's just a really fun part of that is like, okay, I know where I'm going, but how I'm going to get there is always a little up in the air.
You've worked in the business side of publishing. You're a writer yourself. As you look back on your journey as a writer, what advice would you give to someone who's just starting out and wants to be a writer? What would you tell them?
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good question. And I think, like, I feel like the advice that I always give is probably, it sounds like a broken record, but it's finish your book. It's write the book. I know a lot of people who say, oh, I could write a book. Okay, go for it. Do it. It's hard. Writing a full story, like, and a complete story is really hard. So I give like just so many kudos to anybody who has finished a book. Like, you're on the right path if you have written a book. If that's what you want to do. And so I just say, like, write the book. Don't be afraid of it being bad. Your first book is supposed to be bad. Like, don't we all wish that it was wonderful? But I think it was the author of The Help who said she rewrote her book like 28 times or something ridiculous like that. And it's like, yes, like your first draft is not going to be good, and that's okay. I think it was Frank Peretti spoke at a writer's workshop I went to years ago, and he said anything worth starting is worth starting badly. And I just thought, Yes, like you don't have to have all the answers on your first draft. You don't have to have all your answers on your first book. Like it's okay to write it and then say, I need help fixing this. That's what editors are for. And they're amazing. And so find great editors. And I just recommend like finding other writers who are at a similar place in their journey. That for me has been just a huge encouragement. I am not part of like and I've never been part of like a critique group where like you hand people your pages and they, give you feedback. Um, I I instead have just found a writers group that we just talk about we talk about writing, we talk about our stories, we brainstorm ideas. Maybe we talk about the industry and what's working with marketing, what's not, what do we love, that kind of stuff. What have we read that's really amazing? All of those things. But we like just that encouragement keeps me going when it's really hard to find the words, and sometimes it is. And so I think it's just like sort of recognizing that writing is hard work, but it's totally worth it. And so write the book, go after it, but don't be afraid for it to be a bad book, because it's probably going to be. And every author's first book is bad, and most of us, our first drafts are bad, and so that's why we go back and edit.
Yeah, I think that's very smart advice. I think it was Nora Roberts that's often quoted as saying, you can fix a bad page, but you can't fix a blank page.
Exactly. Yes.
You've mentioned that in addition to being a writer, you're a big reader, and I'm always fascinated. It's not like I don't have 10 million things already waiting to read, but I always want something else. So what can you share with us that you've read that you really want to share with other readers, or what's on your summer reading list?
Yes. So I'm on writing deadline right now, which means my reading time is like super, super slim. But I just was on a flight. I went to visit my publisher this week. And so I was on several flights and across the country. And so I had time to finally read. And I'm so glad I did. I started Rachel Houck's Fifth Avenue Story Society, and it's set in a library, so it's like it's my jam. It's like books and it's kind of women's fiction with lots of points of view and interesting characters who are sort of thrown together and brought together by this story society. And it's really lovely writing. And so Rachel Houck's Fifth Avenue Story Society I'm really enjoying. And then the nonfiction book that I've had on my TBR forever, and I just finally was like, I've got to read this, and that is John Acuff's Soundtracks, and it's about the things that are on loop inside our heads, the stories that we tell ourselves over and over, sort of those phrases that are like that are on repeat. And I had listened to him on a different podcast, and he was so smart and so funny, and I was like, I really need to read this, and I just started it. It's amazing, and so I do recommend that one as well.
They both sound fascinating. Um, it's interesting you mentioned your first book. There seems to be, like over the last 2 years, a whole mini boom in books set in bookstores and libraries, and it's like a whole renaissance for that subject.
Yes. Well, I think there's something fun for writers to write about where we love, and for readers to read about, places that they love, because readers love bookstores and libraries and all that too. And yeah, but I think about is it Emily Henry who has a new book out? Maybe it's not very new.
It's about the two editors.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she's amazing. Yeah, there's another one that came out earlier this year, The Bloomsbury Girls by Natalie Jenner. It's set in the 1950s in a London bookshop that's been ruled by the men employees. Basically, they make all the decisions. There's 3 female employees. One of the managers has to take a medical leave. Things are shaking up. Women are starting to have a voice in that bookstore. But if you like 84 Charing Cross Road or anything like that, it's very much that world.
Okay, and what's that one called again?
Called The Bloomsbury Girls by Natalie Jenner.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, you're right. And I'm going to have to look for the Rachel Health one, because I don't think I'd seen that one.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a couple years old, but it's, I'm behind on everything, but I love it. Yeah.
That's the good thing about books. They never spoil. I mean, they're good whenever you read them.
Exactly. Exactly.
I can't believe we're almost out of time. Before we have to go, can you tell us a little bit about what's next for you as a writer? I think you
Yeah.
hinted at it.
Yeah. So the next, what I'm working on right now is Levi's story, which will be the third book in the Prince Edward Island Shores series. And so it'll wrap up everything that happened from Beyond the Tides and The Last Way Home. We're going to sort of find the culmination of all of that comes together in the third book in the series. And of course, you can read them as standalones, but I do recommend reading them in order because this series, more than any of my others, really leads from one book to the next. And so, yeah, I'm loving writing Levi's story. But as I mentioned a little earlier, he's a little bit shy and quiet and doesn't talk a lot, which is amazingly difficult from the writer's perspective. I'm like, oh, I need him to talk more. But he's been just a ton of fun. And it's a story about a hurricane sweeps through the island and damages the local community theater, which is a huge part of Victoria by the Sea in real life too. And so the local drama teacher sets out, she's going to rescue the theater and keep it open. And of course, she brings Levi along to help her, and it turns into quite an adventure.
Sounds terrific. Can readers learn more about you through social media? Do you have a website?
Yeah. Excuse me, I love to connect with readers, and they can find me. My website is lizjohnsonbooks.com. My social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all of them are Liz Johnson Books. So I'm really easy to find. Just search for Liz Johnson Books, and I'm pretty much, Facebook, Instagram. I usually camp out there, but I'm sometimes on Twitter. And yeah, of course, my website, lizjohnsonbooks.com. And I do have a newsletter where I do giveaways and lots of fun things as well. So you can find that on my website. And hopefully, yeah, I'd love to connect.
Oh, great. Well, I want to thank Liz Johnson for taking time to visit the Poison Pen virtually with her new book, The Last Way Home. And I want to thank those listening in to another virtual author chat at the Poison Pen bookstore. We hope to see you even virtually next time. And thank you, Liz.
Thank you.
Kings River Life magazine now has a mystery podcast called Mystery Rat's Maze. Episodes consist of short stories and first chapters of mystery novels read by local actors. To listen to the episodes and subscribe to the podcast, go to mysteryratsmaze.podbean.com or find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and more.